open cockpit, it's the wind blowing in your face.
Being able to go up in the air and feel like you're riding a Harley.
It's the basics of flying.
Flying in its purest form.
It's all the romance you'd ever hope for.
It's like a little motorcycle club with wings.
Clear prop.
Well, this airplane was built during World War II, almost 10,000 of them built. Roughly half of them still exist. You won't find that with, I don't believe, any other airplane.
The Stearman gave you the basic feelings for flying.
This was the airplane that taught kids right off the farm, right out of high school, that had probably most of them had never driven a car before in 1940 and the early 40s. Most of these kids coming off the farms and out of the cities to the Army or the Navy flight schools had never driven any kind of an automobile, and this was the airplane that introduced them to flying.
Just a basic aircraft that if you could control it and had to understand its capabilities and things of this sort, and then be able to control it and fly it successfully without crashing it, why you were successful in that particular aircraft.
I think about, you know, how many young kids have flown this airplane. You know, in the last 70 years when this airplane was built, how many young guys sat here in this seat and held the throttle in this hand and the stick in this hand and maneuvered this airplane and learned how to fly it? How many of those guys went on to fly in combat? How many of those guys got killed in combat?
Well, I would say being the first plane I ever flew, why, it was one that I had good memories of because I didn't have a bit of trouble flying it. A lot of our personnel that were in there did have a lot of difficult time flying it, and we even had some fatalities in it because of the inability to correct the problem that they had.
They brought guys in and put them in these airplanes, and they had a whole pile of them, and they wrecked a lot of them. And that was you know, they needed to train pilots as fast as they could to get them over into combat in Europe and in the Pacific.
Before we left the island, we saluted our dead.
Because this had such a tremendous utility, it was in use after World War II in agriculture work as crop dusters, trainers in the civilian end of it. And then when they started getting the new modern turboprop agriculture airplanes, these things became popular with old pilots. Today,
a lot of Stearmans are being flown by civilians and owned by civilians.
I was never in the military. I learned to fly on my own at a private flight school. In 1977, I graduated in high school the same year, and I used to take all my friends out and make them sick. That was my big thrill. My dad was an Air Force pilot, and after he got out of the military, he came to Casa Grande and he crop dusted in a Stearman. And I remember my grandfather and my Uncle Nick taking me out when I was just a little tiny kid. We'd go out at dark 100 in the morning. We'd drive out behind Casa Grande Mountain and we'd sit by the fields and we'd wait for them to come over and start dusting and spraying with the Stearmans, and then they'd fly over and we'd wave. And so that was my earliest recollection of a Stearman. So I kind of always loved the Stearman, probably for that reason. And as I got older, I grew to appreciate its historical significance and what really a cool airplane it is.
I was almost born in an airplane. My mother went into labor between Denver and Cheyenne in an old Twin Beach. I was born in a hospital, but I always wished I'd been born in the airplane. My dad was a pioneer aviator. He learned to fly in 1924. My mother was the first female to learn to fly in Wyoming. So I just grew up in it, and when other kids wanted to be cowboys and Indians, I always wanted to be a pilot. I started in a Luscombe T-8F, then just flew anything I could, anytime I could, and still do it.
My dad bought a little J3 Cub, 1946, right after World War II. I'd go sit around the airport while he was taking his lessons. So I got interested in aviation at that time. I flew the T-28 in primary flight training, and then my first jet was the T-33. Got my wings, flew my first fighter, the F-100 Super Sabre. And then my first assignment was to Bitburg, Germany, as a fighter pilot over there. Somewhere along the line there, I transitioned to the F-105 Thunder Chief, or THUD, as they called it during Vietnam. And I eventually went to Vietnam, but by then I'd already transitioned to the F-4 Phantom. My brother was the one who told me I should buy a Stearman like this, because he said, "You were Air Force for your career. The Army Air Corps was the predecessor to the U.S. Air Force." He says, "You need to get a Stearman."
So then he got into Stearman, and then he talked me into buying his brother's airplane.
And the rest is history.
I started flying airplanes when I was young. My dad was a private pilot, and he worked on airplanes, and we would build airplanes together. And when we'd get them all finished, I'd get to go fly them a little bit. So I started flying when I was 13 years old. and I got a 1A classification, got drafted in the Army. And shortly after going in the Army, I took all these aptitude tests, and they says, hey, we're going to let you be an officer and a pilot. So I became an Army helicopter pilot, and I flew helicopters during the Vietnam War. And after that, I got out, and this is all I've done for 40 years. Fly airplanes, work on airplanes, things like that.
Before I even got in the Navy, I asked my mother if we could go out to the airport and see if we could, see if I could get into some flying lessons. And we did just that. We went out and checked and found out the lessons were a little bit more expensive than I could handle, you know, or my parents could. So we kind of forgot that, but I really wanted to fly for a long time, you know.
I met Les way back in the 1980s, started taking scuba lessons at his shop, and something was said about airplanes, and he said, oh, do you fly? I said, yes, I have an airplane. Oh, yeah. I said, did you fly? Oh, yeah, I flew. I said, really, what kind of, well, I flew in the Navy. I was a military pilot. I said, oh, really, in World War II? Yeah, World War II. Oh, really, did you fly in combat missions? Yeah, I flew a few combat missions. Well, where at? And he started telling me all the places he'd been and all the different airplanes he'd flown, and he actually was an ace and shot down some Japanese airplanes, and that was like, wow, this is really cool. You know, you don't get to talk to a World War II fighter ace every day. That's pretty amazing stuff.
When war was declared, and at that point, when President Roosevelt declared war on Japan, two other of my buddies was sitting in a library at the college, and we heard this information.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7, 1941.
I was called in on my, just on my birthday, which was July the 27th, when I got orders to go to Iowa pre-flight. Went there and spent 2.5 months there in physical training and some orientation into Navy procedures and whatnot. That's when I got to see the plane I was going to fly, and my first flight in it, you know, so. Well, I thought that was a great big plane. And I looked up at it because when I'd gone out the airport, we saw these little Cubs and things like that out there, you know, and I thought, boy, those would be neat to fly, you know, and all of a sudden I get to see this big biplane. I thought, boy, that's going to be something, you know. Look at the instrument panel, and it's so little and so few instruments that you wonder how in the heck you could even manage to fly any kind of programs with it, you know, but it has the basic instruments and that's it, you know. But after flying aircraft that are, you know, equipped with a lot more controls and equipment, why the Stearman is just more like a real simple plane to fly.
He never says one word about it. You know, he doesn't wear it on his sleeve like you owe him something, you know. He just, you know, he was just a college kid at the time, and he got called on to serve his country, and he went and did his job, and Came back and he never really talks about it much. It's a cool airplane, it's a lot of history and very nostalgic, and but it's not a lot of fun to fly by yourself. And I soon discovered that there were other people around that had Stearmans, and so we started flying together. When Roger bought his Stearman in the mid-90s or so, I found out that he was in the military and he liked to fly formation, so that's kind of how we got started.
Get on the end of the runway, do our run-ups, the same thing. I come from number 4, ready to go. Now we don't do aerobatics like I do with my Thunderbirds, but we do formation. And we've kept a tradition for over 10 years. We do the memorial ceremony for the veteran cemetery. We fly over and do what's called a missing man formation with a flight of 4. We fly through, and this be 1, 2, 3, 4. The number 3 man pulls out of the formation just before we get to the cemetery so that people can see it. And it's called a missing man formation in honor of those that didn't make it back.
And the home of the brave.
The primary mission that all of us have here is to go out, support our veterans. We do a lot of flybys and flyovers for them. We give a lot of veterans who flew these airplanes 50, 60 years ago. We let them get back in and fly it again, which is really exciting for them.
Really kind of a cool thing to be able to take this airplane and go to the air shows and fly-ins and park it on the ramp and watch these guys come up, and you know that they have a connection immediately. You know that they have a connection with the Stearman.
They didn't know that they were going to get old. It was just one day to the next, but it took them back to the romance of their youth. It becomes pretty special.
Most kids, they look at history and go, oh, this is boring and stuff like that. Well, you got to look into it more in depth and look at how this is like, it's still living. This history is still going on. It's not just some book or anything. This is history in the making right now.
Let's give them a hand. They can probably hear us. What an awesome way to start a parade. I want to thank the Antique Aircraft Association and Terry Deming.
You know, as far as the connection for the younger group, like with Chance, you know, I think it's really great that, you know, he's coming up now and he's been fortunate enough to be involved with the Stearman, like I've been fortunate enough to be involved with the Stearman.
Kind of a weird thing to think in 2010 that we would still be flying this great airplane, and people back in, you know, 1930s and 40s have been flying this to train to go to war.
He's actually, you know, got to meet the guys that I fly with and the guys like Les who actually flew these airplanes.
That boy has an opportunity that most children won't even get.
Oh, my uncle, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have anything to do with flying. So thank him every day that I can have this great opportunity.
Terry has trained him to fly it and fly it well, and he does an excellent job of flying it.
If I was flying with another group of guys that flew Stearmans, it wouldn't have the same effect on me. These guys are just amazing.
I would like to see him continue on and fly the Stearman for at least another generation. That's my hope.
My ultimate goal, well, one day is to be able to own my own Stearman and be able to continue to fly with the group of guys, and then eventually, when I turn 18, apply for the Air Force Academy.
If I could have done the things at 14 that he's been able to do, look out. Look out.
I'm going to have a biplane, I'm going to have a Stearman, and I'm going to bring it to these fly-ins, and I'm going to do just what these guys are doing, which is having fun. So here we are.
It's real emotional.
Wind in your hair, sound of the wires, radial engine, you know, very few instruments. You know, it's nostalgic, and that's the way flying was back in the 20s and 30s, and even into the 40s.
A lot of romance then, and what we do is we bring some of that back.
This is kind of an escape.
But this is kind of something I still can do that I did when I was a much younger man.
Is this really real?
Part of aviation.
It's part of flying.